Hi students, I've created a summary of techniques. As you start moving forward in beginning painting, watercolor painting, you'll have access to these techniques, and I'll introduce them as you go. Those of you in intermediate and studio will have already explored many of these techniques last semester and will be ready to utilize these in your compositions. All the techniques that you'll learn in here can be applied not just to abstract pieces but also realistic ones, because watercolor is all about technique. It's more than drawing accurately, it's more than using color effectively and value. All those elements of art, design, they're all a part of it. They're a part of every class. And the subject is always irrelevant, but the technique is everything. So these techniques all have names, and when we're having critiques and discussions and posts, you'll want to draw upon these names as part of your visual vocabulary. I'm first going to start with drip down because it's probably the hardest one to show. Well, it is the hardest one to show because it involves gravity. Gravity is a really fun tool to play with water-based media. But there's specific ways to achieve specific results. And as you get into your projects, you'll be able to choose which techniques you want to use and how you want to employ them. But there's a lot of common mistakes with all of them, but mostly with drip down. So I want to start with that one. There's 4 basic kinds of drip down. There's drip down in the negative space, which is most common, and in that case we turn it upside down to create the flow upward in the negative space. In all these techniques, the key is to get up to the very edge with a flat brush, not a line, but just like what a flat brush does is you place it, pull it, place it, pull it, place it, pull it. You don't want to go around like a line, but you want to get right to the edge. One of the things people do is they go blah, 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 and that doesn't do anything because we want this to come forward. So you'll see me putting that flat brush method into play in all of these. Another thing with drip down, that the biggest mistake is people try to do it with one brush, and you actually have to do it with 2 flat brushes. This is I'm doing a mini version here. When you do it, it's going to be more like a big flat and a medium to smaller flat. It's like a medium to a big. And the size of the brush depends on the area that you're doing the drip down. So in my case, I'm downsizing a little to a medium and a smaller one. So usually it's this, because the background's usually a big space. So just keep that in mind. If you're doing between things or around things, things like that, it's helpful to have other flat brushes. One brush is your designated water brush. The other is your pigment. This technique allows you to use a little more pigment in order to get the effect because you're putting it into a pool. Usually we want watercolor to be very low in saturation, but in techniques like wet and wet, there's some other processes that will do that have that option of using more paint. So in this case is one of them. So what I'm going to try to do here is demonstrate how to apply it and then how to turn it. So I'm going to turn this phone like that to try to show you what happens. Finally, the thing people do is they make the mistake of putting water everywhere. You want to leave this area blank because you need dry. You need dry in order for this technique to be effective. You don't want to cover the whole thing. If you drip everything, you drip nothing. So it's one of those nuanced processes that we always do. So I want to put a lot of water. So you can put a lot. You can see it there, the puddle. But I'm being careful where I'm putting it. I'm not putting it all over. I just want to get enough to play with. And then I'm going to pull it to the edge. But I'm not going all the way. See how I'm not putting water everywhere? See how I went there? You can always see where the water is because it's shiny. And if you lean sideways, you can see it. Just like everything else, it's timing, so we don't want it to dry completely, but we want to be really careful. If your areas are super tight like that, you can of course switch to a smaller brush just to get the water in there to the edge. The more complex the shape, the smaller the brush you'll need to get right in there. It's almost like you're painting it in, but it's just with water. You can always tell where your water is. It's hard to see here, but I can see really clearly what's shiny and what's not. If you don't get to the edge, it's not going to look good. And if you go past the horizon line, it looks terrible, because then everything's floating. You want to be sure to stop, always stop at the horizon line, and that's true really of anything. When you treat the background right up to an edge and nothing else, you get this great pop. So this is already coming forward just by the water. This is where I get the smaller brush, and I'm going to turn it upside down, and I'm going to flip this phone so you can see. You always want to turn it upside down. And then as you turn it, let it drip, and then you're going to add more water so that you can really allow it to drip. So you're kind of blotting in the water. See how it kind of dripped off the edge? That's good enough. So now I'm going to take my smaller brush and choose a hue, and I'm going to use actually more paint than I normally would because it's in water. And then I'm going to place this right at the edge and repaint where the water was, but only here, so that it can do its magic. This is a great option in still life and a lot of other things. So then you just kind of shake it, and at any time you can go to your other brush and add more water to make it flow. But see how the bottom is not treated? I'm not letting it go solid wet, because then I lose that white that happens around the bottom. Now I'm going to apply more pigment, and you can even switch hues, because I haven't achieved this part yet. The minute it dries, this stops working, so you always have your other brush at the ready. It's definitely tricky to hold up in the air. I'm going to go back a little bit to my other hue because I like the way that looked. Now again, it's drying, so I got to get this a little wet here again, up to the edge. But I'm still leaving that white on the bottom. I can even run it along the edge as long as I'm not creating a halo. Now I'm feeling like it's a little bit dark for me. I don't mind usually, but I feel like there's too much of a blob of red-orange here. So I'm getting my other brush, putting more water. Now look at it. Shake it a little. Now we're getting somewhere. I got a blob of pigment in there I may or may not want to get rid of. But you don't want to overwork it. The idea is to have that drip down. And you want to do it in a way that it's balanced. It's like you want to shake it just enough, like that helped. That shake helped. I don't want it to be all the same, and I do want some things to go off the edge. But now let me flip it. Usually you have to wait though for it to dry. Now I'm feeling kind of like it. Whoop. So here it is. It's a little powerful version of it, but that's the drip down to the top. Mine came out a little bit solid, but it can also be a little bit less. So that's the drip down in the back. I'm going to just quickly grab the drip down in the front. Same exact thing. Water here, but not all over. Always just up to the edge. This is when you want to put some kind of a pop of usually warm, but you can put warm in the back, cold in the front. Usually though, the warm in the back is harder to make it look far away, but I just picked that. I'm going to be a little more delicate on this one. But you do want to play with the saturation. And always add water if it feels like it's drying or there's just a little too much white. But always that white on the bottom is so key. And then of course getting right up to the edge. See, it dried a little, so I gotta put water there. And you just have to keep it up on the wall, or taped somewhere, or vertical somehow, taped on a board. It got too strong, I wanted it more delicate. So that means all I have to do is shake it. Whoop, I got that on the top, but it kind of looks cool. Still achieves the purpose. And even though this paper cuts off there, see how there's still some white? There's still some white. And I even turned it sideways just to get it to pan out a little. I actually really like that. It's one of those things that happens by accident that worked. So this is the foreground. So we have the negative space in the back, which is the most common. We have a drip down in the front, which is a great way to define things. And there might be more than one thing here that you have to work around. Sometimes if you're dripping down and you need to travel over something else, this is what you'll need to do. Let's say you have an object and then you have another one below it, and you want to do a drip down on that one, but you don't want to touch that one. All you have to do when you put the water is only paint around. You don't paint the object that's below it, because if you do, the drip will go right through the object. This way you can just do it like this and place it and see how it travels around. So no matter what you do, this won't go past where you initially put the water. So you can see how that goes around. So if I wanted to put something down here, I could have that effect of the drip down without it running over something else. But the main thing is you don't want to put it everywhere. But that's the foreground and the background. Then, okay, this is going to be difficult when you have between. So let's say you have a drip down and you only want it in there, but you can't go around. So something you can do is put tape. You can take tape and just cover the area that you don't want. Or you just have to be super careful. So let's say you want to drip down just in there, but not anywhere else. So you want to wet where you want it to drip from. Depending on how much water you put, it is helpful to have this marked off if you really don't want it to go over that. But the main thing with the inside is you leave it dry, just like you did on the other one. You leave a part dry. And now we put our pigment, and I'm using a smaller brush so that I can really get in there, because when you're in between something, a lot of times you have to use a smaller brush. Sometimes if your water's a little bit dirty, that's a little helpful because you can see it better than the shiny by itself. Okay, that was a mistake, but that was a smear. But this is the area that I'm talking about. We're putting this here. And if there's water, it goes over the other one. If you're not holding it in the air like I am, it's a lot easier to control that drip. But let's say you want to just drip within this area. Just got to be really step by step adding this water. See, you can shake it a little to get that drip. You can also turn it a little and put some water here and kind of drip in more than one direction. And then drip that way. Definitely more hard to nuance, but let's say you wanted an area just like that. You know? I kind of like that yellow. And then more pigment. When it's wet, you can have more pigment. You can even set it down, put more pigment in, and then quickly bring it back up. I'm still being selective with the pigment. You can see how that's one way to treat an area that's actually negative space, but in between. So that's kind of an exciting thing. You could even do it in this little area if you wanted to put water in here. If your brushes were small enough, watercolor is best enjoyed up close. So you want to really focus on technique. Okay, so now we have behind and front, and one last thing. The other videos won't be as long because this is just more stuff. This is the least common. This is when you have a shape that you actually want the drip on top of it, which is very unusual. But let's say your values back here are dark and you still want to have that drip technique. Let's say this is dark and this is dark. So you think, oh, I could still have that light, but I want it to be featured with that technique. And one of the very rare times you would treat drip on the front is if perhaps the space behind it were darker. So you could keep this light but still have that effect. So in this area, I'm going to do a smaller brush, and this is, you can do this on the behind the scene, behind the background too, is sideways. Drips don't have to be up and down. And I'm going to try to do this really carefully without going past. And that has to do with nuancing the water so that the drips just drip to the edge of this. That's tricky to do. But I would use a brush that doesn't hold as much water and see if I can contain the drip within the object. And then I'll take another brush and see if it'll stay within. If it starts to drip past, I can flip it. I can flip it in different ways. It's trial and error, and sometimes it works great and sometimes it doesn't. You can also let it dry between drips. You don't have to do it all at once. So let's say I feel like I'm losing control of the drip. Like down here, I feel like it went too far. I can also catch that with a paper towel as long as it's not obvious. And just a real light drip. So now I have the drip technique on the top of something. And of course I would do a few more over here just because I don't like it over here. There's a little fleck here. And drip that better. Alright, so that's it for drip down. These are all options you can use in your projects. And we've got the summary here. This was the longest one because we have the within the object drip, any direction. We have between the objects and shapes drip. We have the underneath the foreground drip. And we have the most common, which is the negative space, which can also flare out to the side drips. Some people even use a straw with that whole tie-dye thing. But this is a great, more random, asymmetrical one.